What's up? Welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast. This is episode 107. Today we're going to do our second book you should read series, or second episode of the books you should read series. Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm Danny. I'm here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Danny, how's it going?
Going well. I actually like this idea of doing books people should read.
And
You know?
especially difficult books like this because
Yeah.
I needed help myself in order to figure out what he was talking about.
Wait, yeah, right. It's funny too because I think it's like I've read it so many times, and I think people don't realize that too. I think if you study it, you end up reading it a lot, and you're interested in it, and it's not like you read it one time through and like, oh, that makes sense. You know,
Mhm.
they're really difficult and complicated. So I think hopefully it's helpful to everybody, and I think there's a lot of valuable information in it. You know,
Yeah, and we'll just cover a lot of the main topics. So, if you are reading the book yourself, this will help you. If you want to read the book, this will kind of give you some inspiration. And if you don't want to read the book, you could just listen to this and you'll probably be able to participate in some discussions in class as well. So, you know, kill three birds with one stone.
yeah, right. That's what matters. That's what we're all about.
Yeah.
So you said you had a list of some topics that you
I
liked
have
from
I
it.
have some topics here. What I'm curious, what would you
Yeah.
say is the most important takeaway from this book? Or the most important
Uh,
topic?
the most important topic from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I mean, for Nietzsche, I think it was the introduction of the Ubermensch or the Overman, and this
Mhm.
idea that humanity can become a higher type. We can become something greater than we are.
Mm.
And I always really like that idea that we can, this doesn't have to be, our highest point essentially, right? We can go beyond this. I think that's a really important one. Um, Also too, it's interesting, I think within it too, there's a lot of, emphasis on perspective and, finding truth yourself rather than relying on, the society and others and things like that. So there's this great emphasis on, finding meaning yourself in the world and finding, understanding without that influence and without that sort of the pressures that we normally feel to conform, right? To fit in and to believe the same thing that everybody else believes. So I think those are probably two of the more important, but there's a ton of obviously
Yeah.
like
And
topics
we'll
you
try and
throughout.
touch on as many as we
Yeah.
can, like the metamorphoses of will to power. So let's start off there with the Superman or the Ubermensch or the Overman or whatever you want to call it, whether you were talking
Yeah.
German or
Or
Marvel or
what?
whatever,
Right.
DC. Yeah. So okay. So like I actually find this really interesting because he also talks about the last man, which is like the man consumed with comfort and consumption.
Oh, it's a great image, isn't it?
I think it's really interesting because this book was written so long ago, and yet nowadays we're like a completely consumerist culture.
Yeah.
And I'm almost like I wonder what he saw back then that made him think of this. And then at the same time, I'm like, wow, this is even more relevant today. So what are your takes on kind of the last man and then how that relates to this Uber
No, no, I think I think that's a good point too, because I think just on the relate, that's one of the things I always liked about him too, is his ideas seem to be they're more relevant now. And it's interesting, he famously, one of the things he did was he basically diagnosed, the major problem of, essentially Western culture as nihilism, right? Meaninglessness. And I mean, I think we see that today, right? The struggle to make sense of our world, to find meaning. And the last man is like this, like you said, it's like this idea of like, making everything about comfort, making everything about pleasure, thinking that you sort of solved it and not having any response to anything, right? Not being like really engaged in anything. He keeps saying throughout, like, and they blink, right? That idea, like, it's just like, okay, whatever. And and to all these big questions. So it's this idea of, humanity just sort of getting, or the last man getting to a point where it's like there's no longer any attempt to develop, to create, to become better, to do anything, right? Beyond yourself or to make anything of yourself. And that I think is a fairly terrifying concept in a lot of respects because, you know, when we all feel stuck, we feel horrible, right? It's like that feeling that we're like, but imagine just, I guess, embracing it. Or if we embraced it, right? It would be like the essentially mediocrity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's kind of, I see how nowadays a lot of people are in that area where they're very concerned about comforts, like comfort foods, comfortable beds, comfortable clothes. They don't want to go places because they might get stuck in traffic. They might have to talk to people they don't like. They don't, so it's like this whole, and then, while they're being in comfort, they're just consuming Netflix and Facebook and Instagram and
Oh
food and
yeah.
all this stuff. So like, how does did he kind of do you feel that he kind of gave that example just to say that like this is where we're kind of headed and we need to actually go in the other direction. We need to actually do difficult things, be uncomfortable to become this Superman.
Yeah, no, I think he absolutely did. I think he really, I mean, it's amazing, but I think he had a really good sense of what was going to happen. Like reading the situation and being able to kind of predict the outcome. And I mean, look, Nietzsche's not without his faults, obviously. Um, Everyone has them. He tends to be a little elitist and things like that, but he really valued achievements. He valued, essentially greatness. So, you know, really, taking on those hard challenges, doing what's difficult, having the strength to do it. And I think, that he saw society going in a direction that really was the antithesis of that, right? And, you might say, okay, so yeah, some individuals might do great things, but I think he was also thinking of humanity as a whole or culture as a whole as also starting to sort of fall apart and become, you know, so much less than it could be. Maybe that's a good way to think of it, right? That we could be doing so much better, be doing so much more, but we're not doing it because we've let ourselves become so distracted. Like you said, like, I mean, how many people just go home and watch Netflix all night or, on their phones all day? And it's like, you're not really doing anything. Try and, go beyond yourself and make something better.
Yeah. So he talks a lot about the will to power, like self overcoming, self realization through
Yeah.
struggle. And what do you think his points were on this topic? Like just that we all just need to look for ways to kind of develop ourselves. Is that where he was coming from, or what do you think he meant from this?
There's a lot of disagreement on how to interpret this idea, but I think, central to it is this idea that, think of like our will to power maybe is like literally like almost like our willpower, our ability to get things done, right? Anything we do in the world, any goal we set ourselves, I mean, literally any task, right? There's always going to be some resistance. There's going to be something we meet in the way that's going to prevent us or block us. And do we have the strength to get past it, to overcome it? Do we have the ability to either develop the skills or the power or the perseverance to get through whatever that obstacle is and therefore, succeed, right? That sort of is your expression of your, yeah, I guess you could say your will to power in a certain sense. I think for that, what he has in mind too is this idea that, we're creative beings. So we have to offer, we create our world, we create the meaning. And he thinks if we have a weak will, we create interpretations that sort of justify our situation. Just like victimization, things like that would be, I think for Nietzsche, an expression of a weak will, not having that power to act in the world and instead sort of explaining the world in a way that justifies you without changing. So I think for him, strength then is this ability to act. Having a strong will to power is having, or expressing a strong will to power is the ability to act in the world to get things done, have that drive, have that sort of energy to achieve. And I think that's central to it. So it's an interesting idea because it's also about how do we interpret the world and how do we see it? And what does that say about us? Are we trying to sort of come up with reasons or excuses for ourselves, push blame away? Are we taking responsibility? Are we in control? I think that's a central idea with that concept.
Yeah. And it makes sense because like this whole like going from comfort to struggle is something that's very difficult. Like a lot of people get stuck where they are, even though they may not like it, they're comfortable there. And to go after what they want, they have to struggle for it. And it's uncomfortable and it's not fun and it's hard.
Yeah, it's terrible.
So it kind of explains a lot the human predicament that we all kind of have to deal with. I mean,
Right. And it's funny, I think we're all in it too, right? I mean, I think that's part of it. And, I think one of the reasons why I really do like Thus Spoke Zarathustra and a lot of his other works is he really, I think, gets to the heart of that, which is it is about meaning. I mean, we all want to make our lives intelligible, right? We all want to understand our situation, make sense of it. But there's ways of doing that where we, I think, really don't help ourselves through those meanings, right? We're really just trying to make ourselves feel better in the situation we're in rather than doing something with our life.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how he came down from the mountain to kind of share all the stuff that he learned. And on the way down, he meets this old man. The old man's like, people don't want to hear what you have to say. And then he goes, and then he goes down to the village and he tells people, he's like, hey, listen, uh, there's the last man is coming.
Yeah.
We don't want this. We want to be the Superman. We need to struggle. We need to overcome. And all the people are like, nah, I'll just be a last man. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't care. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's the beginning of the book is interesting because right he it starts out he just leaves everything behind. He leaves his home, his society, his community, whatever, all of that, his friends, family. He goes up to a mountain for 10 years by himself, gets enlightened basically, finds his wisdom. And I think it's interesting because this whole idea of like age and wisdom there, where the old man, the old sort of hermit philosopher is just knows that society isn't going to just accept it, right? That most people are just not going to listen to you. And so I think that it was a really interesting thing to kind of put right at the beginning, which is, I mean, it's funny, if you read the whole book, he never really succeeds. He doesn't convince everyone. He never really gets his message to everyone. He does get some people, but not in the way that he wanted. I think that's an interesting point here. And it raises some interesting questions about, our willingness also to, our willingness to really take information or listen to other people and whether society's ready for it, and what does that mean?
Yeah. I also so he goes up into the mountain when he's 30. He's there for
Yeah.
10 years. He comes down when he's 40.
Yeah.
Like me personally, I thought that was very relevant because I feel like 30 to 40 is a very, very important decade in your life. Like most people think like, oh, if you're not a billionaire like Zuckerberg by 20, you've wasted your life. But like I think completely differently how like most people don't actually do anything until they're 40. But like the
Yeah.
decade leading up to 40 is like it really changes the way you think. Like we talk about this all the time, how the older we get, like life just gets so much better because you get this perspective and like you can see things in the way that you never saw it before. And it's absolutely incredible. And I just thought it was like, maybe it was coincidence, but I was like, wow, did he intentionally pick 30 to 40 or was that just like out of thin air?
I remember reading this is in some of his lectures that he did back when he was a classicist, and there was I think there was a ancient Greek historian who used to calculate ages by basically just figuring out that whenever somebody completed their greatest work, they were 40. And so, but the idea there I think is interesting though, because right, it is like, I know we've talked about this before, but that idea that like, just with age, I think you do get a better perspective on life. But you also, I think at the same time, you have to be actively trying to understand it, actively trying to make sense of it and struggling with it, right? I think that's one of the things I think that this book really gets across too, is that, for all of us, meaning is also something we struggle with and will struggle with. We can either, well, or I guess you could say we could either struggle with it or we can just refuse to even think about it. Kind of like the people that just ignore him or the last one, right? Kind of like refuse to engage and accept things as they are. And that will, lead to just sort of monotony and the same over and over again.
Well, okay, so let me ask you because he talks a little bit
Okay.
about eternal recurrence in there, how things just keep happening over and over again. And when he was thinking that, I was thinking of kind of like I don't know if it's Buddhist or Hindu or what, how you just kind of live out the same type of life over and over again until you get stuff right. Now, if people didn't
Oh,
really
like
pay
you mean like
attention,
you think of like karma, and like
yeah,
karma, like yeah, okay,
yeah. So like,
reincarnation.
if he was talking there about how some people just never want to learn this stuff, did he then was he touching on that they'll just be kind of forced to keep reliving it until they do learn it? Or
No, well, his idea, I think, comes from the Dionysian cults, ancient Greek, I think, is, and it's also, you see it in the Stoics too, I think. Or no, it's a more Plato rather. But yeah, the eternal recurrence of the same it's actually the repetition of everything, the exact same. So depending on how you read it, a lot of people treat it more as like a thought experiment, sort of. Nietzsche kind of, in his notebooks, he seems to maybe think about it as in a more sort of cosmological way as well. But the thought experiment makes sense. If you think of it, if I imagined if my life was going to repeat all the same things over and over again, right? This was going to happen for eternity. I go through the same breaths, same actions, everything. Could I say yes to it? Could I affirm it? And his idea is, it's like twofold. It's one is like, it's a way to ask ourselves, are we living the life we should be living, right? Because if I did do it over and over again, would I accept it? But he also thinks that, to affirm it, even if you only affirm it in one moment, you also affirm the whole thing because it's a circle. So you affirm the whole process getting there and everything that comes after because everything's connected. So in other words, like, who you are now is a culmination of all your experiences, good or bad, right? Everything about you, all your past makes up who you are right now. If you change any of that, you would be a different person. And I think that's kind of this idea of being able to accept our lives, being able to accept who we are, the experiences we've had, the difficulties we've gone through because of the person we are. And I think, I've always thought of it in that sense too, of, like suggesting that maybe we should live in a way where we make even all the past worthwhile because of who we are. You can kind of justify even your wrongs in the past by doing things right in the future, right? Or by doing things right now, I should say.
That's like a really empowering way of looking at things. Because then, because if you can just say yes to right now and yes to life right now, it kind of like validates any suffering you may have gone through previously. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's really too, I think, because central too to Nietzsche, and you see it in Zarathustra, he talks about, he really tries to say, like, celebrate this earth, this life. And, one of the things Nietzsche was criticizing was, what he saw as like the problems of Judeo-Christian morality and that belief. But, a lot of these religions having an idea of the afterlife and saying that that's the true world or the true, like, this is all a test, it devalues this world, this life, right? So he's trying to make everybody sort of focus on the life you have right now, that this is it. So celebrate the earth, celebrate this existence because this actually matters, not something that may or may not come after the fact, right? And I like that idea too, because it's kind of reorienting our focus on the here and now and trying to look at this world as something we can do good things in and also value, right? And affirm.
So you talk a little bit about religion there. I mean, that's also a big topic in this book, is God is dead.
Yeah, it's a huge topic in the book.
Yeah. And I mean, this is another thing that we kind of see that he. Do you remember when the book was written? I don't exactly remember how long ago.
Zarathustra was, I want to say 18. Oh
so
my God,
over 100 years ago.
Yeah, it was over. It was late 18, like 80s, no, 70s maybe. Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. So we kind of think that like the world has changed dramatically in the past 100 years. Like the light bulb, the cars, all this stuff, and yet he was almost like the prognosticator of prognosticator when it comes to talking about these things, because we have the last man, these people obsessed with comfort and consuming things. We have very few people interested in religion anymore, and it's like he definitely saw this stuff coming.
Well, yeah, it's funny when he says that, God is dead, and Zarathustra actually says we have killed him, right? That idea. It's funny because it's like the idea that this concept's not, that what he meant was this idea is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? That the concept of God or the concept of a deity and a whole belief system like that is supposed to be empowering. It should be helping us live, be our best selves, right? It should be motivating us to to live our best lives, but it's not doing that anymore. Right? It's kind of, in a sense, it's still there in the background because it's still informing whether we like it or not. It informs a lot of our values and beliefs because it's been dominating for so long. But most people don't even identify with it. So how do we sort of? And I think part of this too is about meaning, right? For a longest time, you can look back at human history and you have mythology, you have religious beliefs. Those are the major sources of explanation and meaning, right? That's the way to understand the world. But we get to our time and his time, science becomes sort of the dominant way of explaining things, and the religious explanation no longer becomes as necessary, right? We know how to explain why. We understand a volcano, how it happens, right? Or a bad storm. We don't need to appeal to the gods. So I think that's part of the problem that he's pointing out, that this stuff lingers and it's still causing problems, but it's not helping us. So maybe we need to rethink this whole system. One of the things I like about Nietzsche, but it's also, I guess, in a sense, makes him challenging, is he asks a lot of big questions and a lot of questions too, just about, really getting us to think about, like, are we doing things the best way? Do these things still matter? Like, really looking at and asking ourselves hard questions about our society, our meanings, the things we accept, and also being able to push back and challenge them to try and find something better. So I think there is a sort of optimistic thread, I think, in his writings about, affirming the world and that humanity can do something better, or become better.
Mm-hmm. So what's a person's response to God is dead? Like, is it kind of like, okay, up until before God was alive, and you're the outcome of your life kind of depended upon that. If you did good here, you would go to heaven. If you didn't, you would go to hell. Now God is dead. We have to rely on overcoming yourself and self-realization. So now it's up to you. Was that the idea behind was that part of the idea behind God is dead? Like, before it was just like, you do good and he'll take care of you. Now it's like more, it's all up to you.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, right? That's how I've always kind of read it, was, before there was like this system that gave you like sort of a guide of how to do this and how to live the best life. And I think now it's just, if it's no longer there or no longer relevant, it's up to us. But the problem is because it's still kind of lingering there. Like, a lot of people haven't realized that yet. And so we're in this sort of like in between, almost like you could say in between sort of stage of sort of, degeneration kind of. Until we realize it.
He had the example of the tightrope walker.
Yeah.
How like man is kind of on a tightrope between animal and Superman. And like we're kind of in the middle of that. And I imagine that's a great example, because we are, even if you look at evolution and science, like we are kind of somehow we came out of monkeys, and like
we're in the middle, right?
There was a song I used to like where aliens came and effed the monkeys, and then that's how humans came. And like, but like somehow, we're in the middle, which actually is a great segue to the three metamorphoses.
Oh, yeah, and we're in the middle. If it's a tightrope too, man, it's like, it's kind of precarious, right? I mean, he also uses the imagery of like a bridge as well. Like, we could be a bridge to the overman, and maybe and actually become something greater. Yeah, the three metamorphoses is great. It's like his first speech, right? And it's this idea that
Wait. Yeah,
before we
go any further, I just had this thought.
Okay.
So you talk about how it's a bridge, and like I remember this story. It's like a motivational thing about a journey. How like when you're halfway there, it doesn't matter whether you get to the destination or you go all the way back. Either way, you're traveling the same distance. And I kind of see that with this idea of, we're traveling from animal to Superman. How like we're kind of in the middle right now, and we have a choice. It's the same distance either way, but like one way we have the last man just totally consumed by comfort and all that stuff, and that'll take us right back to animals who are just obsessed with their passions and and reactive to whatever's going on,
Yeah.
or we can continue and overcome ourself and struggle, and then we can actually get to that Superman.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And it's interesting too, because I think one of the things he's asking too is like, what is the point? I mean, one way to look at it, I guess, is like, what is the point of life? Right? Maybe in a broad way, right? What's the point if we have this life, we have this sort of gift of life, you might say this, we all get a chance, we're lucky enough to get a chance to exist. Shouldn't we be doing something with it to essentially, shouldn't we be trying to make the best of this life and of humanity that we can in that time that we have? Wouldn't that be, I mean, I think for Nietzsche, he's asking, wouldn't that be sort of the reason for, we're these meaning making beings? We can create meaning, we can assess value, we can, assign value to things. Shouldn't we want to then make ourselves of the highest value? Why would we settle for something less than that? And I think, it's interesting because it's like, on the one hand, I think it makes sense. You can see that totally. Like, yeah, why would we do that? And then, but in reality, and I think that's where, like, Zarathustra gets ignored immediately right away, because there's all these competing things, though, in life, all these animal things that also make it hard to sort of, go beyond ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that this book it's got a whole bunch of different themes, but they're all kind of interwoven in a really interesting way. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's interesting as hell. It is. The yeah. So did you want to talk about the three metamorphoses? I like that part too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, it's the camel. So you get the camel, right, and then you got the lion, and then the child. And I always like this one too, because it is really interesting. He says, we all start out. It's kind of he has this idea of, the bound spirit, the free spirit, and then the Übermensch, the Superman or Overman, right? So you can kind of think of it as like a potential progression. We all start out as bound spirits. So that's the camel, right? You're burdened by all the beliefs of society, socialization, expectations, pressures, obligations, right? You feel like you have all these things you have to do, but they're really because of others or other people's values, things like that. That's the camel. You keep taking on all this weight, right? You're burned down with it. And, in order to sort of potentially, pursue your own development, the first thing you have to do is break that burden, right? And so that's, if you look at Zarathustra at the very beginning, he leaves everything, his whole life, he leaves to go to the mountain, to the cave. So he says, in order to break that, you need the strength of a lion to say no. You need to say no, essentially, to obligations, routine, social norms, customs, all of that. Because unless you say no to that, unless you have the strength to say no, you can never actually do the next thing, which is create yourself, right? Or start thinking for yourself, start creating your own values. And it's interesting because he says at the end, you need a child to do that. So your spirit has to become a child again in order to create values. And I was just curious, like, how do you interpret that, or why use that imagery?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we see in all these different religions and all these different thought groups how always like a child is up top. I mean,
Yeah.
child is at the beginning, but it's also kind of at the end. At the end too, like the Zen mind, beginner's mind, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I totally relate with this whole three metamorphoses that he has, because 100%, like, I grew up beast of burden. It was like, do your duty. You got to do what your parents want. Go to school, get a good job. Got to do what society wants. Get married, have a house, have kids. So, like, I was totally this beast of burden. And once I accomplished, like, what I thought the utmost was of this beast of burden, and I was miserable, then I was like, this has got to change. So then, I got to the point where I was like, no. And, like, all this stuff that I did, I disappointed my parents. Like, people ask me all the time, they're like, what are you doing? People don't do stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm not people. I don't care,
Yeah,
and
on
like,
me, right?
yeah. And it's like, so it's like getting to that point of no. And then I think, like, the next point to look at going in the direction is of the child, because they're creative and they have, like, the beginner's mind. So, like, as we get older, we have all this baggage that we take with us.
Yeah.
And I think the child is very good at letting go of baggage. Like, you can see a child crying its eyes out and then 2 minutes later laughing. And like,
Yeah.
how often do you see that with like a grown up? Never.
Yeah.
But it's like,
Never.
but it's like that, but also the creativity, because you just give them some blocks and some toys, or even you just say, let's play and they come up with all this stuff. And kind of the creativity can take all of the negativity from the past, they can turn it into something positive, make something positive out of it. And it was kind of what you were saying with saying yes to life and the eternal recurrence, because that child has the ability to say yes to right now. And because they're
Yeah.
saying yes to right now, all of the past mistakes, all the past problems, the troubles, everything, it's all completely validated because you're saying yes to right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's like you need that strength to say no. And your example works really well. I think a lot of people go through this, right? You have to say no to all that stuff, because it's like you're not free until you do. You're not really free to start doing things yourself. But that child, that your spirit becoming a child. Yeah, I like that idea too, because it's like becoming almost like a blank slate again without that baggage. Because as adults, most people, like, I mean, not even young, even as young adults and stuff, they carry so much with them that they make judgments about experiences and stuff they've never even had, right? We say something's horrible we've never even participated in or done, or have no way of knowing actually ourselves whether it is or not. Or we form all these judgments about things without ever really having any actual knowledge or experience of it. And I think that's like the child is also something, represents someone who any experience they have, they're going to assess it for what it is, right? Not some preconceived notion or idea influencing that judgment or determining how they see it.
Well, we talked previously about kind of like the explore exploit paradox, how like in the beginning you need to explore a whole bunch and you find out what you like, you can exploit it. And
Yeah.
then, and I kind of think that like sometimes I've noticed in my own life when I feel stuck, it's because I'm exploiting too much and not exploring any. And I think that's something that a child kind of does, is like they naturally explore. You have to stop
Yeah.
them from
Yeah.
like sticking their finger in a socket or
Yeah.
touching a stove or like all of that stuff. And
Well, it's like that
that's
natural
also,
curiosity, right? Like that natural sort of amazement with the world, wanting to figure things out, wanting to make sense of it, and being willing to do so.
and also wanting to help. Like I love that
Yeah.
about children, is they always want to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's like, because I think that like a lot of people suffer a lot just because they're not willing to help. They're all about what's in it for me instead of how can I help others. And like you see children are so full of joy, maybe because they always want to help. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, just maybe.
Maybe. And they're not bogged down by all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always liked that too, because it's like you need that sort of creative energy, that creative spirit to also create your own values, create your own meaning, and live your own life. Like I think it's really essential. And part of, I think, his concept of the Ubermensch is that, right? Is you need this sort of creative energy and willingness to do it too. And that's essential to living that good life, right?
Yeah. And I also think that, the three metamorphoses, I think they kind of go around and around and around. Like everybody
Yeah.
always wants to get to the end. So like we're all like, oh, once I get to the child, then
Yeah.
it'll be awesome. But it's like the child gives you the creativity to try something new. And then once you
Yeah.
try that something new, you have all the burdens of that newness of doing it. And like we
Yeah.
talk about how we get stuck in this area. Like once we're doing something new, then we're in the middle. We're in that kind of like beast of burden area. And then we have to start saying no. And then we become the child. So I kind of think it kind of
Yeah.
goes around and around and
I
around.
like that too. Actually, it's funny because actually in Zarathustra too, Zarathustra goes back up to his cave several times because he tries it out, doesn't work communicating to people. He leaves, goes back, and it keeps going back and forth. And it's like that willingness to try again and to view kind of things as malleable plastic, right? Meaning something we create, so it's not something fixed. We can keep trying until we kind of get it right, or and through those trials, I think too, we also are. I think this is also kind of Nietzsche's point as well. Through that constant sort of trying new things, we're also kind of pushing humanity and ourselves further, right, along, because we're sort of broadening our horizons, right? We're doing more, trying more, and sort of fostering that explorative mind and way of living that will open up new possibilities for us.
Yeah. Was Zarathustra a Superman? Was he an Ubermensch? Or
Yeah. I don't. It's This is always tough. I've not. It's hard to say. I think he was definitely. I think definitely he represents, a free spirit for sure. Definitely someone who's creating their own way of thinking and probably closer on that way to it. Maybe I would say definitely a great individual in that sense, but this is hard
is,
to know because it's a tough he sets a high bar for that concept to where like it's
yeah.
hard to know, whether we have a
Maybe it's
great
just like one of the forms, like a perfect circle and stuff like that. How you can
yeah,
never actually do it. How it's just like one of the forms as a Superman, and you can only try and get close enough to achieve that.
yeah, get closer to it and you're always getting advancing still in that sense. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there is definitely he definitely is a good depiction of, though, I think what Nietzsche has in mind for, how we think and creating meaning and all. So I think he offers that at the very least. Yeah.
Okay, so another thing, he goes up to the mountaintop. He learns all this stuff, becomes totally self-realized, woke as f, and
Yeah, right.
and and so then he comes back down in civilization. So, do you think that he did this as a way? Do you think that he did this because he genuinely wanted to help out humanity, or do you think that he did this to kind of be like, I need to fix them?
Yeah, it's funny. I think no, I think it's actually that's the interesting thing too. I think it is a genuine desire to help, right? That you have if you I think one of his points is, is like if you and Nietzsche's own life, was by all accounts not, it's pretty hard, but like if you have this information, if you have this knowledge, wouldn't you want to share it? Wouldn't you want to help others to make the thing that you're part of better? Right. And I think there is this way of looking at, you know, um, caring about humanity as a whole and maybe not necessarily the individuals, but caring about the whole, the whole species and its sort of improvement. So I think there is this thing about, if we have this knowledge, shouldn't we want to share it? Are we obligated to share it? Or, you know, does it make sense to because we want other people to go beyond themselves or to benefit from it as well? That we don't want to be the sole possessors of it, right? I guess.
Hmm.
And he keeps trying. So obviously he did, he really wanted to share this information, right? His wisdom. So I think that, you know, that sage-like sort of activity is kind of maybe something within us that we want, once we realize it, we want humanity to be better. We want people to be better people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that way a lot. How, like when I have a deep realization in myself, I always want to share it with people. But
Yeah.
then,
Right.
but then I also think of the saying that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So, and if it rhymes, it's got to be true.
It
So
always is. Yeah.
it's kind of like the right effort type of thing where like I have to hold on to that until somebody's ready to accept that or until they want to hear that. Um, and
Well, there's
that's a
that
difficult
interesting.
one.
It
Yeah.
is though, right? Because he doesn't force anybody either, right? There is that sense of like, they need to also be ready for it. They have to be in the right mindset or the right state of mind in order to sort of accept these ideas. Otherwise, it's just gonna go right over their head, right? They're not gonna be interested because you're asking them to sort of effectively change everything about how they think, right? And that's not an easy thing to do. And I think we see that now. It's why we constantly, I think, you look at society, we constantly struggle with seemingly the same problems over and over again. It's almost like, it makes you feel crazy sometimes, but it's, you could see the logical conclusion maybe, but, we just keep going back and forth because it's like you're constantly pushing against people who maybe aren't ready, who don't want to accept anything new. And that's going to constantly sort of just cause these things to sort of like a pendulum maybe swing back and forth as we try to make some progress towards something better.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other parts of the book that you think people don't talk about enough or that are underrepresented? things that you maybe found interesting?
I mean, I really enjoy this book. I've always thought I think it's a really fun read. It's difficult, but it's interesting, and it's written in a way that sort of it doesn't read obviously like a philosophy book. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question. It's a hard book to read. That's not the
Yes.
question. That's a statement. It's a hard book to read. How does somebody read this book effectively? How can somebody best read this book? What advice do you have for someone who's
Ah,
struggling with reading this book?
I think one of the best ways to read this, honestly, it's like I've read it a lot of times, and every time I find something new, I think if you're starting out trying to read it, just take it slow, because it's nice because his speeches are really they're not that long, most of them. Um, you know, Try and sort of pick one or something, read it really carefully and read it more than once. You know, think about what's being said, try your best to come up with like an explanation of an interpretation of what is actually being said, the main ideas, and don't rush through it. Just think through it because I think that's what he ultimately wanted. He wants to get us. Nietzsche's trying to push us to think and to think about these difficult things, um, and hopefully better ourselves through it. So I think that's part of it. You just got to kind of take it slow. I think people want to just read it like a novel. It's not going to work. It just won't.
Mm.
You won't. There's no way you'll grasp all of it. I think I remember the first time I read it was undergrad, and I read it pretty fast, straight through because I was reading for class. And it's like you miss so much because you just don't. It's a lot of symbolism and a lot of really complicated ideas that are also very different from a lot how most people think. Right? I mean, it's like Zarathustra coming down to the people. If you don't think the way he's thinking, it's going to be hard to grasp what he's saying. And so it kind of teaches you to read carefully and listen, in a way. Yeah,
Cool.
which I like about it.
All right. So I think we talked about pretty much
Yeah.
everything now. People can go and read it on their own or can just participate
Yeah.
in class discussions without reading it because now they have the answers.
They got enough, right? It's there's a lot in it, but I think there's like a lot of the main topics and all. So hopefully that helps everybody. And you should read that book. Everybody should read. It's important, or at least listen, right? At
It's
least
got
listen
it's
or
got a
watch
lot
it.
of really important topics in it. I
Yeah, it
think because
does.
I'm just blown away with how much it relates to life now,
Yeah.
even though it was written over 100 years ago. Like that impresses me.
That's one of the things I've always liked about him though, is like it's really interesting how like he seemed to really have a keen sense of what was going on and like was able to read it in a way that you saw like down the road, like this is just going to get worse. All of these things I see are going to just be magnified, right? And it's just interesting. Yeah, it's always been attractive because it gets to the heart of our problems. Yeah, so that's our second book you should read, essentially, right? Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche, episode 107. You know, Thanks for checking it out, guys. If you're watching, listen, on all the podcast apps and stuff. If you're listening, check us out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, share, click notifications. All that helps us a lot. Check us out later this week for another quick fix. Until then, it was fun. Later, Randy.
Later, Danny.